Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Episode 14, Such Sweet Sorrow, Part 2. So this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Discovery, of course, up to the Season 2 finale. Up to Season 2, Episode 14. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. Cool, so to give my thoughts on this episode overall, I have a strong feeling that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this episode because I've been watching a lot of reviews and stuff, and it seems to me like everyone loves this episode. It has a high rating on IMDb. I've seen reviews saying that this is the best episode of Discovery. That's a 14 out of 10, and that this is absolutely amazing episode, one of the best. And I gotta be honest here, I didn't like it. I thought it was a real big disappointment. I didn't much care for this episode. And it's funny because I often am more positive on Discovery than most people, or than some people are. There's a selection of people who just don't like the show, and that's fair enough. You know, they don't like the show and they want to express their opinion of not liking the show. That's fine. In fact, that's kind of what I'm going to do in this video. But the thing is, I don't typically agree with those haters, if you want to call them that, of Discovery. But for this one episode, I was watching the reviews, and I actually agree with them. Like, most of the times I don't. Most of the times I don't watch the reviews because I so disagree, and I think they're just being negative for the sake of being negative. But here, I think they make a lot of good points, and I don't really understand why so many people who I'd agree with otherwise seem to love this episode. I don't know. I watched this episode twice, because the first time I watched it, I was really tired, and I actually fell asleep in and out, so that might have affected my enjoyment of it. Also, I was expecting certain things that didn't happen, so I really had to go back and forth on this episode because I had to question myself. Am I right for feeling this way, or is this just an initial reaction, or am I unfairly judging it because it didn't meet my certain expectations? And so this is something I sort of wrestled with, and that's why I watched it a second time and try to analyze it more. And also, I kind of made the mistake of, because I'm rewatching The Expanse with my parents who have never seen it before, and I watched a couple episodes of The Expanse right before I watched this episode, and the episode of The Expanse I watched was Season 2, Episode 5, which is not only the best episode of The Expanse, but I would say it's one of the singular best episodes ever to air on television ever. Like, I put it right up there with some of my favorite movies of all time. And so I went directly from watching that to watching this season finale of Discovery, and I couldn't help but know that the quality just went. Now, I know there's a lot of reviewers out there who would often bring up The Expanse to illustrate how Discovery sucks, but I think that's unfair, because The Expanse is really awesome, and I've always said I liked it much better than Discovery, but one has nothing to do with the t'other. But I did notice going straight from that, like one of the best pieces of fiction ever, into this finale might not have been the best thing, because my expectations, I did just notice this gigantic drop in quality. But I'm bringing this up to say that I might have unfairly judged it, because I do think comparing it to something as amazing as The Expanse is unfair, and it's better to judge Discovery on its own right. So I should have actually been watching the previous episode of Discovery, so that story might have flowed a bit better, because one episode of Discovery flows into another. All that being said, after watching it a second time, I think I did appreciate this episode more than I did the first time I watched it. But I still see that it is absolutely riddled with flaws. There's a lot of things I don't like about this episode. And, my disappointments aside, it seems like the structure of this episode did not work, and that the structure of the overall season did not work. Although I'll try not to talk too much about the season as a whole in this video, because I'm going to be doing another video next week about the structure of the entire season as a whole, which honestly I think is just as problematic as season 1, because I talked about season 1 how the pacing was really off, the structure was really off, and season 2 started. I was like, wow, season 2 is much better than season 1. It's fixing a lot of issues, but it kind of didn't last. Like, it fell back in, and I think ultimately it has the same kind of structural and pacing issues that season 1 did. But as I said, I'll talk about that in my overall view of season 1. But now let me get more into the specifics of this episode. So, first thing I want to get into, let's get into the battle sequences, because this is pretty much, it took up pretty much most of this episode, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes of this hour-long episode. Now, I actually said in my review of last week's episode that I was hoping in last week's episode that they would do the battle at the end of the episode, and then go and take this episode to show the aftermath to what happens, how they fix the timeline, what's going on with that. And that's part of my disappointment, is that they didn't. They just, not only did they not have the battle last episode, the battle took up almost the entirety of this episode, and they didn't really show what happened to Discovery once they went into the future, which to me, this is probably what disappointed me the most. Now, to be fair, this could just be, I have to wait till season 3, and once I see season 3, maybe I'll be relieved of this. But there is a thing about ending a season on the proper place, and I don't think this was the place to end the season. So again, not a good structure, but again, I'll talk about that later. But as for the battle itself, I didn't really care for it. I was tired when I was watching this episode, but I think it's telling that I was falling asleep during these battle sequences, because you think there's all these guns blazing and fireworks and people dying and explosions, and I fall asleep. That's what happened. I fall asleep during the Transformers movie. I fell asleep during Pacific Rim. Sorry to fans of Pacific Rim, but I did not like that movie. I fell asleep during that. So I can fall asleep during battle scenes if they're boring, during fight scenes if they're boring, because if it's just stuff going, that's not very interesting to me. And for the most part, that's what I felt like this episode. There's a reason why I titled this section CGI Fest, because it reminds me a lot of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, particularly the 2009 Abomination. That was, and I talk about this a lot every time I criticize that movie, which I love to do on my channel, is that the battle sequences have no sense of geography. It's just explosion. Like, it's got no sense of story, no narrative structure. It's just like the Transformers movies, and it's just it's just a explosion diarrhea on the screen. And it seems like a lot of modern movies love to do that, and that seems to be a particular style that maybe the younglings are into, but I don't care for it. And I think because I had recently watched season 7 of Deep Space Nine, which had the Dominion War, and those were great space battle war sequences where you had a sense of geography. You could follow the ships, and there were hundreds of ships, and it was arguably huge fleets on huge fleets. So it was a bigger scale battle than the one in this episode. So you could get lost in just an overload of so much ships, but the way it was, I would say film, but it's all CGI. But the way it was structured, the way that you have that point of view, the way it was filmed or whatever, created a narrative. Like, you saw the Defiant trying to slip through the Dominion ships, or you saw the Klingon ships getting bombarded by Jem'Hadar's ships. It had a very clear narrative of what was going on and what was happening. It told a story, even if that story was just how the battle plays out. And I felt like this episode did not do that. It felt more like the 2009, maybe not quite as bad, where it doesn't tell a story. It's just explosion diarrhea on screen. And it didn't play out like a typical Star Trek battle, because it felt more like Star Wars, which is probably why I thought of the 2009 Abomination, because that was made like a Star Wars film as well, where the shuttlecrafts were being like X-Wings, which is never like the way battles in Star Trek were portrayed. Like, even the Dominion War was like, that's a great example, because you had the huge ships like the Galaxy class, but you had the smaller fighters like the Defiant, but then you had the tiny like little ships that the Maquis used to use. They had those ships in the battles as well, so those were more like the X-Wing fighter types, but it made more sense. It flowed well. Having like Enterprise and Discovery use their shuttlecrafts as fighters, like that didn't really make sense to me, and I couldn't really tell what they were doing, because it was just like dots everywhere and explosions everywhere, and so I did not think it was a well structured nor interesting battle. I lost interest. I got bored with it, and I think, and again, I'll talk about this in my overall review of the season, is that the introduction of the storyline, the way it unfolded with Control, did not have me very invested in the story. It didn't have me believe that Control would have all these ships versus, the Enterprise and Discovery and their hundreds of shuttlecrafts that materialized out of nowhere, I guess. I don't know, it just felt very fake, very like, aha, here's the battle. And it did feel very strongly like they were very much trying to emulate like a Game of Thrones or something like that. It's more common, I guess, modern TV to have these huge battle sequences to finish off your story, and I think it was uncalled for here. I think it was just unnecessary, and it just drew out. Like the Game of Thrones battles, like I completely invested in. Like they're amazing to me, not because of the choreography or not because there's people killing each other, but because of the story narrative elements to this and how invested you are in this particular conflict, in this particular characters, and in this conflict. I was not really invested, and I'll be honest, I was not really invested in the characters. Now, in the past, when I defended Discovery, I talked about how I was in fact invested in characters, and there are certain characters I am invested in, but I think this particular sequence did not play to those characters' strengths. I was not invested in those characters in this particular situation, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, maybe to some small extent, like when Stamets got injured, I was kind of invested in him, and when, the Enterprise was put in danger, I was invested in Pike. But for the most part, like all the individual sequences felt like a blur of CGI and not a very good battle sequence, and it took up most of the episode. So in this episode, they show Michael Burnham going back in time to set the signals, and the signals were meant to introduce an element. And some of these elements I'll get into later, but element that Discovery would need to get them to this point in time in order to, get the job done. And so the first element was that she had the first signal so they could go rescue Jett Reno and get her because she's important. Why? But to me, that was never fully explained of why she's so important. I mean, I suppose she was there to recrystallize the time crystal, but I mean, no offense to her, but it seems like Stamets or someone else could have done that. I mean, maybe not as good of a job, whatever, but it seems like she wasn't that important that she deserved her own signal. I mean, it's cool that they rescued her so she wasn't trapped there forever, but it didn't seem vital to the mission overall. And the thing is, I mean, you could argue that maybe no one could have, recreated the time crystal as well as her. And okay, fair argument. But the thing for me, why I consider this a disappointment, is because they kind of teased when she was doing the time crystal. They teased that she saw this vision, a Discovery, getting killed, which. I don't know. That didn't happen. So I don't really see the point of that. It seemed like that was useless, but it seemed like to me they were setting up Jett Reno to play an important role. Like she was going to be a very important factor because of her relation with the time crystal, that she was going to see something maybe that would be important for Discovery to win the day, or something important piece of information for them to know, and it didn't happen. You could argue, maybe it'll happen in season 3. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it should have happened now, in this episode. And since it didn't, this is a huge disappointment to me. Something that a lot of people were complaining about in the previous episode is that they took forever to say goodbye. Like, everyone was saying goodbye. Oh, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And I actually, even though they did it for like a half an hour, I did point out that it wasn't completely believable and that they didn't really earn all this emotion that they were trying to set off. I kind of forgave it because it was the penultimate episode, and penultimate episodes kind of do that. They sit up and they say their goodbyes. But I think this episode didn't do it as much, but I think it's more egregious. It stood out to me more as more unearned and more annoying in the way, because they had already done this in the previous episode, so it's just cumulative effect where you don't need to do it anymore. I mean, you already did it like way fucking too much, and I think overall, this episode in particular felt like it was doing a lot of things that wasn't earned. It wanted you to feel certain emotions and feel certain ways that they didn't earn you to feel it. So the attempt to evoke emotion felt a bit forced and fake. Part of it was the battle I'm talking about, because it's just they didn't build it up enough, so you weren't invested enough in this particular battle. But the other part of it was the goodbyes. Like the thing with Pike saying goodbye to Discovery, like I thought that was good at first when he says, "You have been my friends," but then when he said and my family, I thought that was taking it too far. I thought they should have just said friends, and that would have been great because that would have been short and sweet. But it seems like with all these emotional goodbyes is that they're drawing it out too much, and it becomes a bit sappy. Like, if the shorter the better is my sort of standpoint. And the same thing with Burnham and Spock. Like, again, I get the relationship. I think actually season 2 had done an amazing job of building the reconcile of these two characters and how close they become. So I think they deserved a goodbye, but they take it too far. They draw it out too long, and then it becomes a bit contrived or unearned. It's like the show is trying way too hard to make you cry or make you feel emotional. In the case of Spock and Burnham, like when Spock says the shuttle's injured or destroyed, so he can't make it back to Discovery, so he has to have Enterprise beam out, and you can see the look of hurt on Burnham's face, and even Spock, and I think the actor who plays Spock did a really great job here, because Spock is emotionless, but still within that Vulcan context, you could see how hurt he was and how much he wanted to be with Burnham. That's all you need. That is all you need. That conveys everything right there of how close these characters had become and how much it hurts them, how much it pains them to have to leave each other. But no, the show gets out the hammer and hits me on the head over and over again with a long, drawn-out sequence of Spock saying, "Oh, I love you, Burnham," and Burnham saying, "Oh, Spock, so please don't go. I love you. Oh, tell blah 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 and do this blah blah blah." blah, 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 blah. Just stop it. You do not need, it's overkill, and that's when it turns into sappiness, and that's when it turns into contrived writing. It's the writers are trying very, very, very hard. Oh, please cry, please feel emotions, please do this, when it's not earned. It is not earned. And it is unnecessary more than it's not earned, actually. Because I think the Burnham Spock relationship was earned, but what's more powerful is to be curt and succinct and to have that look on your face. That is all you need. The looks on their face, that tells everything. That's good storytelling, but they went too far and they overkilled, and they did that again with Cornwell, and plus having all these rapid fire goodbyes in a row, it drains you, especially if all these rapid fire goodbyes are all way too drawn out. You got the Saru and her sister, you got freaking what's his face, Ash Tyler and Burnham, and then you had Cornwell dying and all that, and like all those are fine if they weren't all drawn out. It comes off as too draining and too unnecessary and too like, here, let me pull at your heartstrings. I'm pulling. And it doesn't actually do that. If the writing is so forced and contrived, you can tell that what you're watching is trying so hard to make you sad, then it doesn't make you sad. It makes you angry because you can tell that you are trying to be manipulated. Whereas good television, good storytelling, you can't tell that you're trying to be manipulated. You're just being manipulated without realizing it. That episode of The Expanse that I watched, like that did not come off as contrived or forced at all. That felt natural. That really pushed all of the buttons. I was in tears, and that was like maybe the 20th time I've seen that episode. This episode, I wasn't even teary-eyed. It wasn't even sniffling. It was, I felt some connection to the characters, but it was just pulled off so poorly. I kind of get that the point was they want to emphasize that each of the signals were important and brought an element they needed to defeat control or whatever. And you had when the Klingons and the Saru's sister showed up, that's when Spock realized, oh, you need to go back in time. So I get the story beat behind it, but I can't help but feel how cheesy it was and how contrived and scripted it was. The Ex Machina coming at the last day to save, and not only you have the Klingons, and you also have, I mean, to me, the Saru's sister and the Kelpians, they just showed up and they took, Baku fighters or whatever, or however you pronounce it, whatever the fuck those guys were, and that felt too much. That was way too much. That was like overkill. I was like, oh, really? Like, when they showed Saru's sister, my reaction was, oh, that's a nice reunion. My reaction was, really? Really? Come on now. How stupid do you think I am? I mean, it's fake. That's why it doesn't work. It doesn't feel natural. It feels like, particularly the writers, like, here's heroes coming to save the day. It doesn't feel like a natural progression. Now, the Klingon thing, that was so telegraphed. That was beyond obvious. In the last week's episode, Ash Tyler's like, I got something to do. It's like, oh, gee, I wonder what the hell that could possibly be. Could it possibly be him showing up with the Klingons at the last minute to save the day? No, it couldn't be that. Now, to be fair, these kind of Deus Ex Machinas were used in Trek before. And in shows I like Game of Thrones, although Season 7 would use really horrible Deus Ex Machinas, which is why I didn't like Season 7, but I'm not getting into that. Where before Season 7, there's Game of Thrones, would you have good Deus Ex Machinas, they'd pull off correctly, like a Littlefinger and the Vale people showing up at the last minute to save Jon Snow, or the Tyrells with Tywin Lannister showing up at the last minute to save the Battle of Blackwater. Now, those were well earned, well executed. Even though the Littlefinger one, I did hear a lot of people complaining about it. I thought it was maybe a bit too telegraphed, but it was okay. I went with it. This one, that's probably how I would have felt about the Klingons. Like, if it was just the Klingons and Ash Tyler, I'd be like, that's kind of cheesy, but it's the most obvious thing in the world. I knew it was going to happen. It's kind of a trope, but it's a trope for a reason. Whereas having Saru's sister and the Kelpians is like, oh, that's just stupid. I'm sorry, but that's more of the Benjen Stark cold hands showing up at the last second to save Jon Snow, being like, there's no time, and then killing himself. It's more like that. I don't buy it. It's really cheesy. Yeah. So this has kind of been an issue throughout the season. Actually throughout the whole show, really, but I think this episode was particularly bad in terms of cheesy dialogues. Like, there's a few moments that really stood out to me, and as I was watching it, it really took me out of the episode immediately. I had the reaction of what, and particularly, I would say, main focus of the cheesy dialogue with Georgiou and Lieutenant Nan, I think her name is. She's like the Barzan security officer who first came with Pike from the Enterprise. You know, I never had an issue with her, like, most of the time. Most of the time I thought she was a pretty solid character. But in this episode, like, her whole, like, pretty much every time she spoke and her whole interactions were just cheesy as fuck. And one of the worst offenses to me is when, like, you know, Georgiou says something like, oh, let's go get Leland and tear him apart or something, and she's like, meow, meow. And I'm like, what? Alright, she's in the middle of the battle. There's like explosions, people fighting, there's a tense situation, and for her to go, oh, meow, meow. What the fuck is that? It is so cheesy. And then throughout the battle sequences, I can't remember exactly what her dialogue is. I just remember how cheesy it was. Like, I'm going to watch you. I'm going to rip you apart. It felt very fake. It felt cartoonish, if I'm being completely honest. And Georgiou, I gotta be honest, like, as much as I love Michelle Yeoh, they have been really terrible at writing dialogue for her. Her dialogue has often been, I mean, she had that really, like, clunky, uncomfortable scene when she was hitting on Stamets or whatever, and they constantly, and then just blurts out to Pike, oh yeah, by the way, I'm from the Mirror Universe. Like, stuff like that, they're just writing very poorly for her, and it continues in this episode. And that whole thing where, like, she gets Leland trapped in that chamber, and she's like, I want to hear you scream. And he screams. I was like, why is he screaming? This is an artificial intelligence. Why is an artificial intelligence screaming like that? They don't really experience pain the same way as human beings do. And why would he just oblige Georgiou? And just the whole way she was interacting with him before this, just like, I didn't buy it. I felt really cheesy. And one other thing that kind of irked me was at the end of the episode when the Enterprise crew was like being interrogated by the mouthpiece, which I'll get to later. Everyone was saying their names for the record, and it was like, Lieutenant Spock, Captain Pike, and then number one came. She's like, number one. Now, that kind of bothered me, because I know it's been like a running gag, kind of like how Morn doesn't talk and how you never see Norm's wife on Cheers or whatever. It's been a running gag that we don't know number one's full name. Like, number one is kind of like her like nickname that Pike has from, kind of like how Picard used to call Riker number one, because he was his first officer, and number one is Pike's first officer, and that's kind of because from the episode of Cage, they never really gave her a name, and so they want to like be loyal to that, and I understood that, and up to this point, I thought they did a good job with that, because they just never mentioned her name. They always, like, sometimes people would refer to, when talking to Pike, they'd just call her your first officer, and or just call her number one. So they have cool ways of getting around that. But here, by outright saying my name is number one, is pretty fucking stupid. I guess the way she said it, I guess she was being kind of defiant. But really, what they should have done is when they had that montage when everyone was stating her name, just leave her out of it. Like, those montages, they were leaving some people out of it. They didn't need to have her say her name, and I think that would have been better. I know it's a small thing, whatever, and a lot of people might disagree or whatever, but I don't know, that kind of bothered me. Get into the time travelness of it all, because this is something I think is a bit messy in this episode. So Spock determines that Michael Burnham, before she's trying to get the discovery in the future, but it won't work, and he's like figures out, oh, it's because you haven't set the signals yet. You need to go back in time and set the signals before you can go into the future. But the signals were set because Discovery saw them, obviously, and that's what led them to this point. So it was already done. Doesn't matter when Burnham does it. If maybe she goes into the future and then goes back and sets the signal. I mean, does that really make a difference? But okay, whatever. Fine, let's go with it. So Burnham goes back to when they rescued Jett, Reno, and that asteroid. And the present-day Burnham there was injured, and she was saved by the Red Angel. Now, this was actually used as evidence before, when they thought when the Red Angel was Burnham's mother, that Burnham's mother would come back and save Burnham all the time, because they assumed that was Burnham's mother that saved her life in that particular instance. But in this episode, we learned that it was Burnham herself who did it. Now, we see because Burnham's mother did save her as a child when she was killed on Vulcan, almost killed by the Beast or whatever. So we know that Burnham's mother did come to save Burnham's life, and in fact, that's how they trapped Burnham's mother, because they put Burnham's life in danger because they knew that she would come to save her. So why didn't she come to save her that time when she was dying on the asteroid? And if she did, would she have seen Burnham and the Red Angel been able to figure out that there's two Red Angels? Would there be two Red Angels at the same point? Anyway, yeah, so they set these events in motion. So Burnham sets the events in motion by setting off all the signals. But here's the thing that gets me: is the only reason why Burnham knew to set the signals is because she experienced that herself. She knew she was there when they saw the signals, and she knew what happened. She knew the good it led to, and so that's how she knew to set the signal, say to get Jett, Reno, or to that there were time crystals on Kronos, or that the Poe lady would be able to help them fix it. So that kind of creates a time paradox, doesn't it? Because where did that knowledge that Burnham has that this is where Discovery is gone, she only has this knowledge because the signals led them to there. So she knew, if you know what I'm saying. So it's like, it depends on how this is where time travel gets messy, because assume there's a timeline where Burnham goes through and there's no signals, right? Because they haven't been set yet. So, but it's like the time. It's like the type. I guess it's a kind of 12 Monkeys Lost kind of time travel where everything was meant to happen, and it led them to that, I suppose. But Star Trek has never been shown to operate on that timeline. Star Trek has always been you go back in time and you alter and you change the past. I think there's maybe a few examples in the franchise that have maybe like time zeros, and I think they kind of did the 12 Monkeys rule, but usually they don't. But leaving that aside, it's still a loop. Is that because that knowledge of that Jett, Reno was there? Like, how did they know that Jett, Reno was trapped on an asteroid? Because the signal led her to it, but she knew how to set the signal because the signal, you know what I'm getting at, don't you? It's a bit of a paradox, which I'm not saying is a huge negative. It's just, I don't know. I think it's a bit unnecessarily complicated. I think a lot of the plot this season was unnecessarily complicated and messy, but I'll get more into that when I cover the whole season. I've seen this episode twice, but there's still a lot of things that I'm not very clear on now. Sure, I'll get people correcting me in the comments, and I actually wish I had someone, to talk to ask them what the hell actually happened. So, Admiral Cornwell is trying to disarm this. Looks like a torpedo. I don't know what the fuck it is, but she's trying to. It's like some kind of warhead. She's trying to disarm it so it doesn't kill like half the people on the Enterprise, and it turns out that she needs to stay behind. From the dialogue, I thought she would actually have to climb into the torpedo and do something with her hands, which is why she needs to be there. But when Pike leaves, she just stands with her hands behind her back. So I don't really get why she needs to sacrifice herself. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, and 1,000 people are going to correct me in the comments. I've seen this episode twice, and I still don't get it. So I honestly, I don't put that blame on me. I put that blame on the CGI Fest of explosions and not explaining things properly. But on the other hand, I don't know. That did feel really forced. Like, oh, we had to sacrifice a character. But, I was saying that I thought I didn't like Admiral Cromwell very much anyway, so I'm kind of wasn't that upset at her death, and I thought they should have got rid of her anyway. But if it does seem like they are going to set Discovery, or at least the next season of Discovery in the far future, then she wouldn't be in the show anyways, so they didn't necessarily need to kill her off in order to do that, but whatever. So Michael Burnham has to set a signal in order to guide a Discovery into the, the vortex that takes him into the future. And I'm sorry, but I'm not. If you know me, I've been a strong champion that Michael Burnham is not a Mary Sue, that she's a rich and dynamic character. There's a lot of specific episodes where I was like, how can anyone possibly call her a Mary Sue? Because she's shown as flawed, she's shown as dynamic, and I actually really I thought her Vulcan upbringing and her trying to reconcile that with her service in Starfleet actually really worked well, where I know a lot of people didn't like it, a lot of people think she cries too much. But this scene where she was like in the Red Angel suit and it's like just super flying, there's like rainbows behind her, and it shows how it was like the hero shot, and she's leading Discovery into safety. Like, that was too much even for me. Even for someone who doesn't think she's a Mary Sue, she definitely felt like that was way overboard in showcasing her as the hero. And plus, it was so cheesy, like the rainbow effects as well. Like, oh god, don't get me started on that. But that leads me to another sort of important question that I have is: so Discovery, the whole plan, has described in the previous episode, is because Discovery has this sphere data that has pretty much reveals all the secrets of the universe. It knows everything because it's been around forever, and it like recorded like everything. And so Control wants to get a hold of this data because it can become basically unstoppable, omniscient, because it will know everything. So it will be able to kill all sentient life in the galaxy because it will basically know everything. And so Control's desperate to get this data so it can do it. And the data itself is fights to stay alive. So it fights all of their efforts to destroy it. Whenever they try to destroy the data, or if they try to destroy Discovery, the data takes over and like protects itself. So they realize, since they can't control the data, the only way to make sure that Control doesn't get a hold of it is to send it into 1,000 years in the future where Control can't reach it. What if Control it takes over like 30 Section 31 ships? It seems like it might be able to figure out time travel, especially considering that Section 31 had access to time travel technology because the Red Angel suit was created by Section 31 in the first place. So I don't know if that logic really works, that Control would never be able to reach it, but that's an aside. Getting to my main point here. So in this episode, They fight off Control, and Giorgio, Giorgio kills Leland, or the Control, and by magnets, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really get that either. Magnets, bitch! Like, that seemed like a really easy way to, like, Control was unstoppable, and it had all these ships that had a huge fleet, but it just took Burnham and that one Narn person to just, like, put it in a little chamber and put magnets, and that's it. Solves the issue. But anyway, I digress. So the point is, by the time Control's destroyed, all the ships are like lifeless. Pike's like, I'll just destroy them because they're unpowered, because they're all being controlled by Control, which is no more kaput. Like, the magnets bitch killed it. So why is Discovery going into the future? I don't know. Like, maybe it seems like a very elementary question. It seems like a lot. I've heard that a lot of people ask this as well. So I guess it's plausible this question might be resolved in season 3, but that's bullshit. It should be resolved now. Why is Discovery going into the future? As I just laid out, the whole plan was to keep the sphere data outside of Control's hand, so it couldn't destroy all sentient life in the galaxy. But Control is no more. It's dead. It's destroyed, and they know that. Like, Giorgio said this. She said this to Canon. Pike heard her, Saru heard her, Burnham heard her. They all heard that Control is completely gone. Yet they still like, all right, now all is left to go into the future. Why? Why are you going into the future? Your plan is no longer needed. The whole point of the plan was to keep the spirit data away from Control, but if Control's gone, you don't need to do that anymore. I don't fucking get it. This is what disappointed me the most, is the fact that there was a short trek before the season started that showed Discovery 1,000 years in the future and is waiting for something, and there was like an artificial intelligence named Zora, or however the fuck you say it, that was controlling, this became it became sentient, because it was sitting there waiting. And actually, they kind of made it clear in that episode that the Discovery ship had been waiting there for 1,000 years. Like, it didn't just try and travel 1,000 years. It had no crew, so it was alone, but it was waiting for something. So, I said last week in my review of last week's episode that if the season ended without them resolving or tying this in or explaining this into the show, that I would think the season sucked. And guess what? They didn't do it. So guess what? True to my word, season sucks. Or maybe not that far, but I was highly disappointed. I think that's bullshit. This is a short track that came on like months before season 2 even started. So basically, if you say the whole thing, oh, maybe season 3 will explain this. Season 3 is too late. Season 3 is too late. You can't have a short track that was released to promote season 2. It was released months before season 2 to set up something for season 3. That is a big load of bullshit. That's horrible. And you know what I honestly think it is? I honestly don't think in August or October, whenever the fuck it is they released this short, I don't think when they were writing this short and releasing it, they were thinking, oh, we are going to set the stage for season 3. Because we know some of the other short tracks really came into play this season, like the Saru's background played a major factor in this season, and of course the Poe character was introduced in the short trek, and she played an important role in these past 2 episodes. So the short treks were definitely shown to have meaning in setting up the season, and there's no doubt in my mind that when they originally wrote Calypso, they were like, we are going to set up season 2. There's no way in fuck that they were thinking, oh, we're just going to set up through season 3. We're just going to do it super early. Bullshit. They were planning to pay this off in season 2, but they changed their minds because the showrunners got fired, and it got a change of showrunners and change of writers, and they changed everything around. Everything got fucked up. So I have no doubt whatsoever, not the tiniest bit, a smidgen of doubt, that the reason why the Calypso short was not paid off was due to behind-the-scenes production issues, to different writers coming in with different ideas, and this is not how they planned it, and it pisses me off. When Discovery goes into the future, and then we never see it again, we just focus on Pike, that pissed me off too. I was like, what the fuck? We don't even get to see what happens to Discovery, and yet we get this bullshit with, oh my god, these scenes. I think this is what really hurt the episode the most to me, as these scenes with Pike and Spock and number 1 and Ash Tyler getting interrogated by Mouth. Why do we only see, it was like, I order you, like, why are we only seeing his fucking mouth? I don't get that stylistic choice there, and I think the directors of the episode did a really bad job too, because at the start they had that split scene. It felt like a 60s, it felt very cheesy, it didn't feel in place with the rest of the episode. Yeah, but anyway, what the fuck was that? Oh, whatever. But anyway, so the producers of the show have been saying in interviews and stuff that by the end of season 2, those who complain about Canon, don't you worry, this season is going to fix Canon. And that had me worried, because I've been seeing how they've been fixing Canon this season so far, and it's dumb. Like the whole thing with, and they re-emphasized this for these episodes of Pike saying, oh, take all the holographic images out of the Enterprise. I don't like them. Like, that's supposed to fix it. That's supposed to explain why every time in the original series when they had contact with Starfleet Command or another Starfleet ship, none of them had holograms either. And the fact that in Deep Space Nine they were just introducing holographic technology. They specifically said it was something new piece of technology that Starfleet did not have before, that takes place a century later, so that does not fix canon. It insults my intelligence. And so they did a lot of that here, where it was the dumbest thing ever when Spock is like, oh, well, I'm never going to speak of Michael Burnham ever again, because, and especially the way they ended with, I will never forget you, Michael, and you made this important, because he had, and also the way that she was saying, oh, go find someone so different from you and cling on to them, is so obvious that they were foreshadowing for his friendship with Kirk, and her actual words outside of that context, which it would be because of course none of them know about Kirk yet, makes no sense. So it was very contrived foreshadowing, and then you have the whole thing with, oh, I'm never going to speak of her ever again. Like, that's too much. You don't need to do it. I would rather they just do the whole Cybok thing and just be like, how come you never mentioned him before? Just never came up. Like, to me, that makes more sense, actually. I buy that more than the whole, well, it's classified because they destroyed and were trying to hide the secret, so I'm never going to tell anyone ever again, not even my closest friends that I share everything with. No. Especially how, because they made it worse by making it clear that Burnham had such an impact on his life, and that she was his first teacher on humanity and how to embrace the human side, and yet he's not going to talk to her ever again because it's confidential. And also the spore drive. I've been saying that I've okay that they have the spore drive, because I'm pretty sure they've come up with a good reason for why there's no mention of the spore drive ever again. And this is not a good reason. My faith in the show was misplaced. This is stupid. So they say, oh, well, Because, okay, so Pike and the others blame the spore drive for Discovery getting destroyed, so they consider it a junk piece of technology. So they want to classify it and don't want to make sure that all information about the spore drive does not become public knowledge. Now, there's an issue with this. Next Generation takes place like a century or so after Discovery. Have you ever heard of declassifying things? Things usually get declassified over like 30 or 40 or 50 years. 100 or so plus years, this information is going to be declassified. Now, granted, the technology would be considered junk technology because as far as they knew, it's what destroyed Discovery and the technology didn't work. But is 100 years later, surely someone's going to find a workaround or try to improve it. Someone's going to find out about this information because surely it would be declassified or at least more readily available. Even maybe some highway, even if it's still kind of classified, some highway big shot engineer in Starfleet might have access to this, might have a high security level and be like, this is worthwhile trying to do, because you got the Admiral Pressman making this whole deal about doing these experiments with fucking cloaking technology, interphasic technology, and sure, he was doing it on the down low, but if someone had the possibility of using technology that could get you instantly from any place in the galaxy to any other place in the galaxy, you think that's something that they would actually try, classified or not, faulty or not, scientists or someone would try to improve upon it. Someone at least would have knowledge of this. So the fact that this was never... that is a very piss-poor excuse, in my opinion, to say why the spore drive never was mentioned ever again. I would have liked something better along the lines like the Marseille network got closed off to them. And I thought they did this in the previous episode, but apparently not. I think that would have been better. They just said the aliens who lived there made it impossible for them to use spore drive. But since the plot required Discovery to use the spore drive a couple more times after that episode, they decided not to go with that excuse, but I think that excuse would have actually been much better. But anyway, so more on the spore drive, and so they'll never speak of it again. They'll never speak of Discovery again. So because Discovery was destroyed and had this experimental technology, they're never going to talk about it ever again. Never going to talk about anyone on board. They're going to pretend like Michael Burnham didn't exist. What? But that doesn't make any sense. Now that's stupid, because the ship destroyed, you're not going to erase the complete record or identity of everyone who died to save you. This whole thing was complete and utter bullshit. I don't really get why they're covering it up, because Pike and all of them know that Discovery went to the future. Why are they covering this up again? Why did they even go in the future again? What was the point of them going to the future? Fuck. So, my rating for Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2 out of 10 is a 3. Very poor. I'm sorry, but I wanted to like this episode, but I just had so many issues with it, and I think it's plausible some people may come up with explanations I missed in this episode to explain some of the things, but that doesn't excuse how poorly the CGI battle was handled, how they drew it out, how they didn't resolve things this season that should have been resolved, how they overdid the sappiness in the long goodbyes, and how they had these cheesy Deus Ex Machinas, and how they did such a piss poor job in trying to fix Canon where they've been better off if they didn't even bother, in my opinion. So this is not a good episode. I'm sorry. And in fact, when I first saw it, as I said, I was more down on it. I probably would have given it a 1. But watching it the second time, I did appreciate it a bit more. I did see a few things that did keep my interest, a few things I thought they pulled off well. But I still think it's not a good episode. I still think it's very poor. Anyway, that is it for my review of Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. And that is it for Star Trek Discovery. But as I said, I will be back in about a week for my full-length review of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. And I am going to be doing a live discussion video with my brother at Kentomko over on his channel at Kentomko, where we are going to talk about mainly the second half of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. Maybe the season as a whole. And I'm not sure precisely yet when that discussion is going to be, but I think we tentatively said it would probably be next Thursday at around 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's what we set it up for now, but don't quote me on that. I'll put a link to the video in the description below once we have the link up. So yeah, be sure to join us for that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my channel as I do many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.